Okay, so I'd like to welcome everyone to the weekly now meeting of the Florida chapter of Elders Climate Action. And we've got two of us from Florida and three from elsewhere. So why don't we just begin? Sherry, you could introduce yourself, tell us where you are and what interests you about being in this group today.
I'm from Southern California. I'm a former journalist, and I'm very interested in the environment and futurism. And I have a number of projects that I'm dibbling my toes in to try to help facilitate. Hoping to help writers or people of all ages voice their concern about climate change and figure out a way to spread it through the media so that we realize there's more of us than it seems in traditional media's reportage of it. So that's my interest.
Wonderful.
Nice.
And I'm with the Southern California ECA, and I also am with EAN, Sound Democracy, and ethics committees and other. I'm trying to have a broad base of outreach, and hopefully it bring a lot of new content into the mix, archive and make available a lot of content about our stories.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for all you're doing. And Joanne, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Joanne. I am in Silver Spring, Maryland. And it's a beautiful spring right here. The name Silver Spring is true to its name. We are in the middle of cherry blossoms, and my son calls all white blooming trees dogwoods, whether they are or not. Daffodils, narcissus, tulips, redbuds, and I am totally basking in it. The reason I am involved with this group is because my friend Sue Blythe has a long hook. And I tend to respond to that long hook. And so I am trying to inform myself about the breadth and depth of commitment to climate action. And I'm not taking a lot of action, but I'm certainly learning a lot. Glad to be here.
And we're so happy to have you here. And Joanne has been helping with taking some of the climate stories that our participants submit, and we put them into a blog. And so that's part of our process. And Sherry, I think I'm hoping that we can collaborate somehow using the blog here and you doing some blogging there and getting it all together in some way so that it makes sense as one climate story. I figure we each have a climate story to tell. And then we, as a state or a country or the world, have a story of the whole human family coming to deal with this climate crisis. And David, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Heidi, I'm David Sinclair in Tampa, Florida. I've known Sue for a while. We've been members of the Florida Interfaith Climate Actions Network. We have many connections. We're probably about 2 to 3 hours apart if we were driving. I'm a member of many groups here in the Tampa Bay region, the Tampa Bay Climate Alliance, but also with the LULAC, which is LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens. And one reason I'm on the call today, and as Sue knows, I've avoided many calls, but not intentionally, is that today I just happened to have finished videotaping 17 members of underserved communities, like 3 minutes per interview in English and in Spanish, because for Earth Day, I'm going to put together a 60-minute video anthology of interviews with members of frontline communities and what their take is on the climate crisis. And I just happened to have concluded that this morning. So I saw Sue's invitation. I said, that's meant to be.
You're wonderful.
Happy
Wow.
to be here today again.
And I know that over the years, through that Florida Interfaith Group, Climate Action Group, we have heard many of those stories at our meetings once a year. And it's always been my intention to collect those stories and get them available so that anybody can have access to them.
And
And
if I may add, and I hope it is understood, not misunderstood, I intention, while I am an Anglo, white Anglo, I grew up in Latin America and my heart is there. I've chosen during the anthology of the 17 I interviewed to avoid interviewing white Anglo-Saxons on purpose, okay? Because often that perspective is very different from those who are in the underserved communities. So I say that in a good way because I wanted to give voice to those who have not been able to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that perspective and for the background that you chose to bring into our conversation today.
It seems to me that that is a true mission of a journalist, to give voice to those who don't necessarily have it. So I will be eager to see the product of this.
Yes.
Thank you.
We'll love to share that widely, David. Thank you. And Kimberly, how about you? Welcome.
Hello. Yes, I first heard of Sue Bright through the World Met Baha'i Institute, where I took climate change class, and that's how I found out what the wonderful things Sue Bright is doing about reaching out to the community, and I really became interested during this pandemic. I'm a member of the Northern chapter of Elders Climate California, and I help volunteer for the Poor People's Campaign, because there's climate change involved in that organization too. And I've been writing stories, my climate story. So that's a new passion of mine now. and getting involved in causes like participating in commission meetings about the oil companies, and telling them why it's not a good idea because of fossil fuels, and they have to change their tactics. So that's a it's a progress, but maybe one day it's going to be hope.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you for all you do. Kimberly has probably been one of our most prolific climate storytellers, and thank you for all you do and for reporting it in. And
thank you, Sue, because this has been a dream of yours 10 years ago, and look how busy you are now.
Look at me now. Yeah. So I'll tell you, I just finished writing a story. I'm going to tell you a quick climate story that's got a very long backstory. And so let's see if I can find it here. I just posted a story. Yes, here it is. I might as well share my screen quickly. Do this and do that. Wish there were a quick way to do this. It takes me a while. Optimize and share. Okay, so what I did was I wrote a story, and I'm actually we have real true climate stories for David and Sherry, who have not been here before. We've been writing our own climate stories, telling about significant moments in the past or things that we're doing right now in our own lives at this time. And we are going into a imagined future. And so what I'm doing is taking us all the way to the year 2050. And this is my story for the children, which is also for anyone. But I started with, tell us a flashback, said Jenny. Well, how far back do you want to go? Asked Great Grandma Sage, sitting back in her easy chair. Tell us about the first Earth Flash game show, said Annabeth. Ah, yes, I remember it well. And there's a song for that. So the background music, when this gets put into a musical play or an animated movie, whatever it ends up being, this, who knows what the music would be, the background music for that song. Ah, yes, I remember it well. Anybody? No. Okay, there's a Maurice Chevalier movie. I think it was Gigi. And
Oh.
he sings, ah, yes, I remember it well.
With that French accent.
Yes, and
Yes,
everything,
Gigi.
everything he remembers, she remembers differently, right? And
Gigi.
so it's just I enjoyed that song. So I'm putting lots of songs into my storytelling because I like to do that. Okay, so I remember it well. It was way back in April 2021, and the world was in pretty sad shape. The human family was divided in so many ways that it seemed like we'd never pull together to make a world that works for all. But many of us knew that the climate emergency was real and we needed to make a massive shift in life as we knew it to reverse global warming. And the window of opportunity was closing. The Earth Flash game show was the final project for the Florida Climate Conversation to Action program. We thought of that as an intergenerational climate conversation, but it wasn't until the seventh of the 8-month program that it actually involved young people. So, Adrian and Brianna were the secret ingredient? Asked Annabeth. Adrian, Brianna, Rebecca, and Victoria, and so many others were like a catalyst that made the magic happen. We'd been gathering the bits and pieces for years. It was a long, slow process. I have lots of significant moments in my climate story. Each has its own story, but for now, I'll just tell you the short version. And so, what I've done, each of these bullets is a moment in my life that actually might have been, 2 weeks, some of them, or 6 months or a year, some of them. But I'm just telling the significant moments that have come from the time, let's see, where did I start? In 2012, I did a year-long program with 20 middle schoolers. And at the end of it, they said it was good, but too long. Can you make it a game? You know, we're all about games. And so I started looking at how would I make this into a game. And I went through all of these dots to get to the point where we could play the Earth Flash game show, which we'll be doing on Tuesday, April 20th. And I will send all the information so that you can watch in live at that time. It's 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, the 20th, or you can watch the video recording afterwards. So I knew that for years, I knew for years that there was a game to be played, but I didn't know how to get it out of my imagination and into the world until the first Earth Flash game show. Adrian and Brianna were the key. Elders like elders like me, right? Elders like Jim and me had been working slowly, steadily for years and years. We knew in our hearts that one day the tipping point would come. So we walked on and on with hope in our hearts. There's a song for that. Anybody know it?
You'll never walk alone.
And how does it go? Dad?
You'll never walk alone.
Okay. So
When you're
imagine
lost in a storm Hold
Hold
your
your head.
head up high and don't be afraid of the dark.
And so
That's
there's always hope. Everybody remember that
South
one?
Pacific,
What's that, David?
from South Pacific.
I think
Yes,
it
yes.
it was Carousel.
Oh, carousel.
Carousel. Yes. Okay, so there's a song for that, and the rest is history, said Jenny. And her story, added Annabelle. Sage smiled and felt a swell of gratitude for being part of the story of the great turning, and a swell of love for her granddaughters who would grow up. Oh, that's her great granddaughters who would grow up in a world so different from the one she'd known as a child. And so that's the end of the story. And I say, note, if you'd like to hear the rest of any of these stories, write to Dear Sage, and I give my email address, and ask for a specific topic. And so what we're doing is a project of the Climate Collab. Well, this is working with the Climate Collaboratory, which is a pilot project of We the World and the University of Florida Extension. And so Elders Climate Action should have a logo right here. Interfaith Climate Group is there. We have several others. David, we can ask about getting the Florida Climate Actions Network, and if the ECA and NorCal and Southern California want to participate, we want to get lots and lots of logos of co-sponsors. So everybody has a climate story, and potentially each of you could have a climate story that fits into our 2050 memories of the time that we're living through now. And so let me stop sharing and just see what you think about all that.
Are you asking what we think about the wording of what you just read?
Not necessarily the process of telling stories and having those moments that are significant. So let me just let me say it this way. If you were to write a climate story about what you are passionate about, everybody's is different. Not everybody's in a game show, but you are passionate, and maybe you could just name one or two. Why don't you name one or two moments that were significant moments that you would think would be something that young people might be interested in hearing?
Maybe a time that they felt vulnerable. In other words, it could be a storm or whatever, but a moment in which they felt vulnerable and felt that they had very few choices.
Okay, that's one way to do it. And I'm thinking, how about you? When did you feel vulnerable?
Personally, when Hurricane Charlie came through here, it was one of
Ooh,
3 hurricanes in 4 consecutive weekends.
yep.
And
20
that,
to
and it was
2004.
okay. And it was supposed to come to hit us straight here in Tampa, and it did not hit us. It skirted us. Therefore, I felt kind of vulnerable because I had my daughter was young. So that's my answer.
Thank you.
Yep.
Who else?
And
What are
it's
we?
good. So I'm going to put it onto the battery charger. You may not see me for a while.
Okay. All right. Who else has a vulnerable moment that would be of interest to in your climate story? Kind of anything that relates to your own reactions to things that were happening with the climate that you became aware of.
Well, I guess I'll say that I was under the false impression that we were making progress throughout my life. from the 70s when I first started thinking of myself as an adult in high school. I thought we were making progress and we were going to get our planet cleaned up. I was not quite a hippie, but had very, very hippie ideals. And the moment of reckoning for me was when I saw it all crash with Trump, because he undid every amount of progress that we had gotten to so blatantly that I thought all bets are off. Evidently, it doesn't. I felt it, more dismayed and more cynical and disappointed in humanity and our world than I could have imagined. So I decided I needed to get more involved instead of doing art and instead of doing the things I wanted to do in my life. I thought I have to put my attention into this because the legacy of survival is too precious to me. So that was a big moment for me.
Wonderful.
Not a moment, a big period of time. Trump gradually rescinding all the progress that I feel we as a species had made as the leaders of the world and the economic giants of the world. We set the pace and he went in reverse. And so I found it very disturbing, as I'm sure we all did.
And we have an opportunity to make that transition to a place, and I believe it's through the arts that it will spread like wildfire.
And the young people seem like they're taking the reins, and so
Yes.
I am encouraged.
Yes.
It takes a big catalyst sometimes for change to happen. So it may end up that that's what we needed to wake up, is getting to the brink. So I am optimistic.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Kimberly, how about you?
Yeah, I guess telling a story, I guess you have to tell a story, I guess that you're passionate about. And I guess stick to that.
So can you think of a moment, I like David's example, when you felt vulnerable?
Oh, when I felt vulnerable. Well, maybe when I was working in the parking garage in San Francisco, and I was around all these fumes, as the cars were exiting the garage and smelling all these fumes. How is this going to affect me in the future? And so that's why it's important.
And it's interesting that you continue that concern
Yes.
with the oil companies in your.
Yeah, so maybe somewhere in the back of my mind that sticks out, and so that's why I'm passionate about this.
Wonderful.
Because all the fumes.
Yeah. So speaking of arts in the climate conversation, welcome Cliff Cockerham, also in Florida.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
And Cliff, what we're doing right now is just remembering a time when we individually felt vulnerable because of something that we learned or heard or experienced about climate change. And so let's hear next from Joanne.
Well, I have to say Sherry's story triggered something for me that was significant. Back in 2018, our family was approaching its 100th family reunion. And my daughter and I decided to compile a book of facts about our family. And we solicited stories from elders and other family members, just about anything they remembered that they could share about what life was like any time in those past 100 years. And I remember thinking out loud, geez, what did we used to do with our trash? So this is only, 3 years ago. And I thought, oh, yeah, we used to have a burning barrel out back. And we had to pay for community trash collection. I lived in a rural area outside of Rochester, New York. And so my parents were very conscientious that we would burn in the burning barrel what could be burned, and we'd only put in the garbage cans what couldn't be burned. But when we were on vacation at the Thousand Islands in northern New York State, right on the St. Lawrence River, I remembered going out in the boat with my grandpa and taking the trash in paper bags out to the middle of the river and scattering the garbage on the surface of the water. And the seagulls would come down and, dig up whatever they could before it went down. And I remember asking my grandpa, well, won't all this stuff come back to shore? And he said, oh, no, we're too far out. We were like maybe 2 miles out into the river. And I just went, oh, okay, and didn't worry about it. So I decided to write up that story for the book, Very Voices, that we called the book. And then I thought, well, when did I start becoming conscientious about litter? And my dad had a disability, and he had a disease that was similar to polio, but from age 12 on, he used crutches in order to walk. And he would drive along the country roads, along the wrong side of the road, open up his car door, lean out, holding onto the steering wheel for balance, reach down and pick up beer cans and beer bottles and chuck them behind his seat. And so when he would come home from work, we would often go out and collect these bottles that we could then turn in for money. And I thought, wow, my dad was doing that back in the like 1960. He must have been on the forefront of environmentalism. And I remembered laws also that said, don't litter, you got to pay a fine, road signs that were all of a sudden out there. So I looked up, and this is the point of reckoning, this point right here. I looked up to see what year that might have been. When did it become a national policy to stop littering? And I was appalled, absolutely appalled, to find out that anti-litter campaign was like a smokescreen. It made us as individuals think that we were responsible for the mess that was being created by the bottling companies. And I just couldn't imagine how I was so duped all these years. I mean, I'm 72 years old now. This was 3 years ago that I found out that recycling, the whole effort to recycle, was companies not taking responsibility for their own creation of like the plastics and the glass bottles and the aluminum cans. Companies pushing the responsibility off onto trusting individuals who then took it on as their own mission. And I was thinking my dad was on the forefront, which he really was, which helped us kids understand it was important. But it took decades until I began to realize that we are individuals that are trying to clean up messes that were created by mega corporations that refused to take responsibility for what they had created. And I didn't ever think of it in that perspective, Sherry, until you just told your story. So it was a bit long, but it was a long time in coming.
Yeah, well, thank you. That it's certainly parallel to the idea that people can curb all the problems with fossil fuels by driving less or buying an electric car. And that's not the crux of the matter. And so, yeah, we can certainly apply that. So, Cliff, how about you? We're looking at a time when you felt vulnerable and where that took you in terms of your climate story. And you are muted. Cliff, are you there? You're muted. Okay, well, maybe we can come back. So the next part of our climate conversation is, yes, it's wonderful to tell these stories here, but we need to start taking them out into the community. And this is part of what we call we're focused on Florida because I'm working with the University of Florida, but this can happen anywhere. And so the idea is that you would want to share that story and invite people to participate in some way in a bigger event that would get them into action. And so basically the university is saying there's so many resources and tools and programs and courses and activities that we can share if people are looking for them. And so this idea is that we tell individual climate stories and start what we call a community-wide climate conversation. In Gainesville, Florida, where I live, both the city and the county have declared a climate emergency. And there are things going on at the governmental level. Certainly, we have a whole bunch of organizations that are working on climate action. There's a little bit going on in the schools and through the faith community, that there's quite a bit going on in different religious organizations in our community. So the idea is we want to find the people who are already doing something and amplify their voices, just like you were saying, David, that people who have a story. And I love the way that your process is focused on non-Anglo populations, that these are the people who are most affected and need to have their voices amplified. And so that's kind of the focus of our community-wide climate conversation. And I wonder if you could think of just one organization, institution, governmental office, or something that you could share your climate story and invite them into to take a bigger step that they could do organizationally. Who would you think of that you could approach in theory?
Well, not in theory, but in practice. if the purpose is to move the needle a little more, to be more willing to take the risk and ask organizations to see things from the point of view of those who are vulnerable, I would say that looking at the list of what we call green organizations, you may be able to move the needle slightly. I know the Sierra Club is rapidly moving the needle to understand the needs of at-risk underserved communities. So I would not say the Sierra Club because they have begun that, but perhaps groups like World Wildlife Foundation, groups that generally have been concerned just about diversity, meaning plant and animal diversity, to move a little more towards the diversity of humans. So that's my brief response.
Thank you. Good. Wonderful. So who else can think of an organization or group of organizations you would like to approach?
I think health organizations are ripe for cooperation. I've been very interested in reading about lawsuits brought by the public to health or to the government, but through the health, the doctors. And I've found, especially people that are conservative, that don't trust science, they trust doctors.
Mm.
So rather than try to approach them just with the climate science, how is this going to affect your health? How is this going to affect your children's health? And so maybe trying to involve medical groups in making that statement, because they're trusted. Scientists aren't trusted by real extremely right-wing people, but like I just said, doctors are. So that's what I would suggest.
I love that concept. And I'm thinking of, in Gainesville, you mentioned earlier the importance of the arts. And we have a program with the university's health department that is called Arts in Medicine. And it started as a hospital-based program and is now reaching out into the community. And so that would be a perfect group to work with. I love that idea. Thanks. And that leads us again to Cliff, who has worked so well with the arts community. Cliff, are you there? He disappeared.
Yes, I am.
Ah, there he is.
I was fixing lunch earlier.
Okay. All right.
I'm not sure what to tell you. I'm a climate ambassador with Physicians for Social Responsibility, and I serve on a number of different committees and groups that work on issues of the co-benefits of health with respect to fighting climate change. The messaging studies by Maybach and Yale et al. Indicate that for undecided Americans who are not climate denialists, not Trump supporters, exclude them as a wholly separate group. But if you're dealing with maybe 60% of America that truly is undecided, they're not negative and committed against dealing with climate change or dealing with government, there are two key messages which the studies show are the most important and successful in moving the needle from the idea of climate change could be real to climate change is real, I should do something someday, and then finally climate change is real and I need to do something today. And the two messages that move the needle from the first to the second and the second to the third is the statement climate change is now, climate change is real, climate change is happening, and climate change is caused by the burning of fossil fuels, and that is the overwhelming consensus of the scientific community throughout the United States and the world. The American Association for the Advancement of Scientists, 10 million physicians, PhDs, and engineers around the world, the National Academy of Sciences, the Royal Academy of Sciences, the academies of science throughout the world, and major US institutions of research like NOAA, um, like the National Institutes of Health, the EPA, the NSF, etc. So that's basically incontrovertible. And what people, to move that needle from 1 to 2, where I got to do something someday, they need to hear uh, and be convinced from an authority figure that it is an authoritative understanding, that there are things which are risk probabilities in the field of climate science, but this is not one of them. We know the basics. We can't tell you whether uh, the eastern seaboard of the United States is going to flood by 10 feet rise in a particular year. We could just tell you it's going to happen. And we can tell you it's going to happen by 2050, but we can't tell you the amount. There are lots of uncertainties, but the core science is not uncertain. It's well accepted, well proven, and actually the idea of atmospheric loading of greenhouse gases causing heating is something that's been in the literature since the 1800s and was on the verge of widespread acceptance by 1980 and is now totally accepted by the scientific community, except for paid spokespeople who have sold their souls to the devil, and basically work for the fossil fuel industry or uh, sort of conspiracy branches of the federal government of uh, political groups. I shouldn't say the federal government, like the Proud Boys, the nuts. Now, the second message, which moves the needle from I got to do something about climate change, it's real, and I should do something someday, but I'm not sure what, to okay, I should do something today, is the health co-benefits message delivered. Um, Forgive the background noise. I'll ignore the phone, but we'll have to keep going. Um, that message is, and it's the message from the overwhelming majority of the scientific community, and I can list the American Medical Association, the cardiology, all the major uh, medical societies, the major journals, the Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine, the American Medical Association journal, uh, and that is that if you reduce greenhouse gas loading by the burning of fossil fuels in your community, it's true, you will be reducing the direction we're moving towards catastrophic climate change, both the rate and the magnitude. But that's talking about an effect that is 20, 50, 100, 200 years from now. That's talking about an effect that is most dramatic for Bangladesh and the northern half of Africa that will become unlivable. And that doesn't move people. What moves people is this fact that if you reduce the amount of burning of fossil fuels and therefore reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in your community to a statistically significant level within 1 year, you will also see a statistically significant level in the drop of infant mortality, because the burning of fossil fuels is the cause of the modern plagues. They're major contributors to heart disease, cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, kidney disease, neurological disorders, major contributors towards um, learning disabilities, major contributors to infant mortality. Diabetes is even contributed to by fossil fuel burning. And so if you go along with stopping the burning of fossil fuels or even just cutting it back, your health within a year will be better, your spouse's health and your children's health and your neighbor's health. Now, that's a 1-2 punch that unless someone has made a religious commitment to, I don't want to believe in this, they will be sold. Now, the other thing I need to make a clear point about is that you do have to separate which audience you're talking to. Because if you are talking to people who believe Lindsey Graham and Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, and by the way, we're not even sure Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz believe what they say. Many of us think that they know what they're saying about climate change is wrong, but it's embarrassing for them, having been pro industry, pro fossil fuels, and accepted so many millions of dollars, that it's hard for them to say, oh, well, I got your money, but I was wrong. Now I'm going to change. So they're looking for the opportunity to come clean, but they're going slow. In the meantime, their followers, the Proud Boys, the nuts, okay, now, and even Republicans who are not crazy out to take
Uh,
over the Capitol building.
Cliff,
I'll finish in 2 minutes. I'll
okay,
finish in 2 minutes.
quick. Yeah.
Those people, if you tell them climate change is real, you've got to stop it, they'll actually go out and start a forest fire, start burning trash, buy a gas guzzler. They have an opposite reaction that you would want. And so there's a different psychological approach where you start with them talking about values like, we don't want government regulation. What we want is market solutions to market problems. So let's vote for a carbon fee and dividend and let people vote with their feet. So there is a solution, but it's not the same solution. That's done. Back to you, Sue.
Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
yeah, very, very good messaging and really important. And so I want to just draw back to the idea that David was expressing earlier about the vulnerable communities needing to have their voices amplified in this conversation. And they are the ones who are most affected by the health problems that you've identified, Cliff. And so yep, we're just carrying on. So Kimberly, can you give us a quick one? Because there is something else that I would like to do before our time is up.
I guess continue to fight everybody, and I like the idea how you're working with the youth, the University of South Florida. And so that's what we were talking about, I guess, the other day, the Elders Climate Northern California, how to collaborate. That's a new word I learned. Collaborate with the youth.
Yeah,
And so I think we're going to be meeting with some youth. You heard of Sunshine Group?
yes,
We're going to have a webinar coming up later on this week. So that should be interesting
wonderful.
to see what they're doing. How can the youth and the elders collaborate together? Just
There you
like
go.
what you're doing in South Florida University. That's wonderful.
So thank you, Kimberly. And yes, it is, you know, we call our organization with the University of Florida the Climate Collaboratory. And so we're learning the skills of collaboration, because right now the groups that are working on this are quite separate and not yet collaborating. So we're trying to facilitate that. I wanted to just go over quickly something that's coming up for us. We have, as I showed you earlier, we've been getting together a Earth Flash game show that is eventually going to be youth led. Right now, it's still very much a collaboration, but we want it to be something that the young people can kind of take in the direction they need to go, because it may be very different from what I would do. And so the other part of this storytelling, and we call it a collaborative storytelling adventure, is for the children. And they're starting with a game board and playing some very simple games that are environmental related and loving the earth. And then using each of the houses on the game board as a place to go into another world, essentially. And we're using many different platforms to help engage young people in games and drama and storytelling and just play with it. And we're developing that with the schools. And so we're in conversation with how we could do that at a district level and let the teachers lead the way with the children as creators of these games. So we'll see how it goes in the next year. We're hoping for some good response. The other thing is that we have outlined the activities for children, youth, adults, and elders, and put that into a package that we are now preparing to take to corporate sponsors, potential corporate sponsors, and ask for the donations in kind as well as financial donations that would help us to carry this forward. And we came across a program, and this is from our friend Esther Fick, who's up in Canada. And she, her climate story, if I may tell it quickly, is that she just, when she learned about the climate reality, I think it was through that program, um, she was just so overwhelmed that it completely debilitated her for, I think, months. And what finally got her through that was realizing that it, like you, Sherry, it takes climate action to feel better about the whole situation, that I can do something and I can help to make it I can be amplified by working with an organization. The one that she decided on, well, in addition to this one, is called En-ROADS. It's a program from MIT, and it has a simulator. And I'd like to just show it to you that I started playing with it this morning to see when I opened this up, it started at it says if we have business as usual. It's this black line on this that goes up and up and up and up. And at the end, which is 2100, it estimates that we'll have 3.5 Celsius above where we want to be. And by manipulating all of these things and putting some as high, not even as high as they'll go, but as high as, 3/4 of the way up on some, and then as low, but not all the way again on all of the energy supply that is basically the fossil fuels. Where can we get? And by these, by just fiddling around with it, I got us down to 1.4, which is not good, but it is more manageable than 3.5. And so this is one way of making a presentation to, it might even be good to get involved in the schools with this at the university level, in businesses, to just make the possibility. It is possible for us to turn this around if we do this. And so, what I'm thinking is the climate conversation needs to address each of these organizations that includes the energy supply in your community, like Kimberly is doing, the transport and businesses and development in your community, and then the land and industry emissions that we can reduce. And the one that we're really focusing on in Alachua County is um, being able to, we're looking at the Trillion Trees project. And so I put our afforestation, carbon removal, all the way as high as it'll go, because I feel like that's something we can do. It really made an amazingly small difference. And I was so disappointed to see that. I expected it would be much bigger. But let me just show you what happens. if we bring it all the way down, it's just barely making a difference. So it may be that we don't want to make that our primary goal for Alachua County. But just finding ways to affect each of these, getting a team of people, not to try to do it by yourself, but helping to get a team of people from the different organizations in your community that are already working on it. That's the way I see it. And doing it with young people through the arts is a key, I think, and helping to give young people opportunities to play and create and make it something very engaging and fun and musical. There's a song for that. And so we're aiming towards a play. We have the future or the Earth Flash game show that's happening on the 20th of this month, and I will send information. There's also a training for this En-ROADS simulator that's happening on Thursday this week, and also one day, I think it's the 10th of May. And so if that's something that interests you, there is training to be able to use it and present with it. So that's my spiel on where I would like to see this community-wide climate conversation go. And I'd appreciate your thoughts on that.
Especially the trucking industry. Those big trucks on the nation's highways, they need to get in to electric trucks. Because look at all that diesel that's spewing out.
And so there's a you know, a measure of that on the En-ROADS. You
Yes,
can actually see what happens as you reduce that.
that's what we're trying to work on with the California legislature in Sacramento,
Good.
to get some new bills going through for the trucking industry. And I heard the trucking industry, they're afraid because a lot of people, this is what I heard. They said electricity, the workers, is not as much pay as the oil and gas companies.
Yeah.
That's the big sticking point.
So as each of us finds the narrow focus that we want to work in,
Mhm.
we can encourage others to find theirs and then see where do we need to work in our own community. What is
Yes.
being addressed?
Um,
Joanne?
Before the pandemic, my son was on the announcement list for the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship here in Silver Spring. And they would have conversations, like they would have a potluck and invite people to a conversation. And I went with him one time to one about Make Soil, the group Make Soil, that just simply composts and makes soil to replace the soil that's subsiding. But I think the conversation is a very important point, and whatever means of increasing the conversation, there has to be a first step for people that are already on board, but people that might be, and it seems like the atmosphere right now, there's a larger might be potential than there was several months ago.
Good.
And so I think that the next time we get together next week, we could actually share some things about how do we see ourselves bringing that conversation to a wider audience. And yeah, I had another thought and it's gone. That's it for the moment.
I agree. Somehow, I have a feeling that the way my participation in any of this is going to happen is in having a widening conversation so that each person feels heard and potentially part of it, and realizes that it's not other people out there uh, in the legislation only that excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. Um, Being part of a Zoom conversation is very encouraging and empowering to people. And so even if we end up using it for other things, just the act of recording and encouraging every person to have a turn to say what they are considering doing, or just hearing what other people are doing, is empowering and encouraging. So I agree.
Wonderful. So I look forward to seeing how our chapters of Elders Climate Action can collaborate on this. Cliff, you wanted to add something?
Well, I'm just thinking one of the one of the virtues of the climate stories is that I think, for example, somebody walking by a table at Earth Day or a kiosk in a mall might stop and listen to a story and think, and because of that, follow up going to a website. I don't think, for example, sharing climate stories to other people who have climate stories or other people who are already committed is going to move the needle. The virtue of the story is that it hooks people maybe who have no connection. It hooks them to give them a connection.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is how to get them out there. And I think, for example, I could picture if I were running a religious service in May is the celebration of Laudato Si, to pick 5 or 6 climate stories to run before the service begins for people who aren't sure why they're there. That's the kind of use that I think would be important to develop. Also, um, speaking not to the denialists, but to the not yet members of the choir, like the local Rotary Club, would be a place to bring climate stories and play them in the beginning before you get started. Use them kind of the way a lot of groups play background music, only this would actually be background with a purpose. That's all.
There's a song for that.
Well,
It just reminded me of an idea that I've had talking to other groups about having people tell that they go out of their way to support businesses that are responsible, and how they've changed their buying powers or their investing priorities. And if we had those kinds of stories grouped, we might go to city councils. I don't mean city councils, I mean,
would you take it
what is it?
outside,
Business
please?
groups that
Mission.
meet, Chamber of Commerces of cities, and say that, or PR companies or whatever, we may try to influence businesses to be more responsible if they hear that people are making, and there's probably statistics that we could add to it, but if they hear that it would behoove them financially, not just morally, to be cleaner in their back, and to be more transparent.
Beautiful.
I had one that thought that I lost previously. You know how there's a time temperature clock, or there used to be, on banks? Going through a small town, you could just always guarantee you could see the time and temperature.
Mhm.
Wouldn't it be cool if there was a drawdown display counting down how many things have been saved, or how many pounds of carbon a certain entity had shifted to? But if it were out there where there was some visible sign that would keep people abreast of some aspect of mitigation. I just thought that would be so cool.
I love
And
that.
and especially businesses that are that it would be a way for us to even say, oh, there's a business I want to deal with because it's mindful of these things. Anyway,
Beautiful.
I love
So,
They do that in schools, in some schools now that have gone green, where the school is running off solar power.
oh,
And so
really?
they'll post a sign saying, you know, this percentage of our electricity is coming from the grid. And it'll go from, you know, 50% to 1% to minus 10%, meaning they're selling back
That's very
energy to the grid.
cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
It's important, like if you were talking about the achievements of the current year for a community, that might be driving people to suicide right now. You'd have to find a narrow area of real success to show people.
yeah. So we are in our Earth Flash game show. We're not there yet, but you know, hopefully by fall we can have some kind of a system, a point system, or earning points for the Earth and keeping score of that by. You know, you could do it by school or by city. The Florida Extension is looking at doing it by county. And so you can also have little games to play county to county. We can do better than you can because we're so good at competing in football and things. We can turn that into this kind of a what we call a co-opetition, that we are trying to help each other get the best score we possibly can. So that's the idea. And I know that we've gone over our usual time, and I sure do appreciate the quality of this climate conversation today. And everybody can copy in fact, if you would like to put your own email, what I can do is send the follow-up email just to the people in this group, and we can be able to stay in touch in between. But we will be back next week at the same time on this same link. And so thank you all.